Today on the History Channel, we will be looking back on what is the most corrupt age of American politics, the Gilded Age. It all began with Lincoln's promise that Americans would experience a new birth of freedom. However, on that fateful day at Ford's Theater, he was assassinated, and the promise died along with him. Corruption plagued the nation and spread like never before. As Grant was elected into the White House, Americans experienced fraud, poverty, segregation, and an increasing divide between socioeconomic classes. Now to Devin Hartsoe, Ph.D. in Gilded Geology, to tell us about the planting of the seed of corruption in the White House, the Grant administration.
In the election of 1868, the Union General Grant defeated Horatio Seymour in a landslide in the Electoral College votes. However, the popular votes were a much closer margin. This election began the era of good stealing. President Grant had built his career as a general, but therefore he was an inept politician. His political oblivion led to a period of corruptions that was the start of the era of good stealing.
Notorious in the financial world, Jay Gould and Jim Fisk concocted a plan to seize the gold market.
The reason why it was a White House scandal was because it also involved President Grant's brother-in-law, who received a large sum for his connection with Fisk and Gould. On September 24, 1869, they brought large stocks in gold to sell to others for a much higher price, resulting in a large profit. The Treasury Department was forced to sell large reserves of gold to stabilize the gold price. Grant had done nothing wrong, but his inability to quickly resolve the situation was worrying.
Another major scandal under President Grant was the rise of Boss Tweed and his infamous crime ring that described the ethics, or lack thereof, typical of that age.
Boss Tweed was the leader of the New York crime ring. He controlled all the elections and secured major places in office in New York City for his conspirators. Boss Tweed and his cronies used graft, or physical intimidation, to get others to follow his lead. This all ended when the New York Times published information about Boss Tweed and his wrongdoings. Samuel Tilden was responsible for Boss Tweed's arrest, an act that made Tilden viable for a future presidential nomination.
Another scandal under the Grant administration was the Credit Mobilier, a railroad company that committed fraudulent acts in an attempt to gain more money for themselves. In the election of 1872, Grant was re-elected as president for a second term, despite the corruption that had occurred in his first term.
Grant was re-elected because his opponent was Horace Greeley, an editor of the New York Tribune. Greeley was a member of the Liberal Republican Party, a group of Republicans who were against the corruption of the traditional Republican Party. The Democrats endorsed Greeley's presidential nomination. Though Greeley was an editor of a political newspaper, Americans had to pick between two people who were never truly involved in politics.
More scandals, including the Belknap scandal and the Whiskey Ring, occurred in Grant's second term. When Grant left office, an obscure politician was voted into the White House. His name was Rutherford B. Hayes. The Democrats elected Samuel J. Tilden as their nominee, but he was defeated in the election of 1876. The election was disputed when 3 states turned in controversial vote counts, but a compromise was reached and Hayes was chosen under the condition that military reconstruction would end. Thus, the South returned to its old ways. Cases like Plessy v. Ferguson allowed discrimination in the country, and Jim Crow laws became prominent. Under the Hayes administration, many ethnic groups clashed, 2 of which being the Irish and the Chinese.
Dennis Kearney was able to pass a bill to keep Chinese people from coming into America. This is because the Chinese immigrants were willing to work for less than their Irish counterparts. So what do you think of the Chinese Exclusion Act?
雪亮金白什么胶囊主要成分是由白芪、决明子、焦骨兰、何首乌、珍珠粉主要原料是成，是药物同源中产品，通过中药调理，达到疏肝理气、活血化瘀、改善面部微循环，加强皮肤呼吸，清洁皮肤，减少皮肤基本细胞， 达到美白效果。通过中药调理进入体内的五脏六腑，纤维细胞，并进入抗炎，消化细胞组织无弹性现象发生。
James A. Garfield won the next election in 1880, but he was in office for only a short time.
Charles J. Guiteau wanted a stalwart Republican to be in office, but Garfield was a half-breed Republican. His vice president, Chester A. Arthur, was a stalwart that Guiteau supported. Guiteau also believed that Garfield owed him a federal job. He was refused, and his fury due to his rejection made him believe that he needed to bring a stalwart into office. At the Washington Railroad Station on July 2, 1881, Guiteau shoots Garfield and explained, "I've killed Garfield. Arthur is a stalwart." Blaine's supporters found out that Cleveland had a son with a widow back in Buffalo, New York from when he was mayor. They created the slogan, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" for this controversy. Cleveland's supporters dug up dirt on Blaine. They found Blaine's Mulligan letters, proof of a corrupt dealing in which Blaine sold bonds in favor of Southern railroads.
Cleveland won the election when one of Blaine's supporters created an offensive slogan towards the New York Irish stating "Rum, Romanism, and Rebellion." This cost Blaine the state of New York, which had the most electoral college votes, and therefore the election.
As you can see, this period in American history was correctly dubbed the Gilded Age by Mark Twain because of its misleading appearance of progress after the Civil War. The poor became poorer and the rich became richer. Political divisions ran deep and discrimination was plenty. Thus concludes our special segment on the Gilded Age.